Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Kathryn Andries.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey. We are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio, being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. You can also find us on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, TalkStream Live, and many others. We're here in the Heartland, holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have our longtime friend, David Matthews, on today. And he's got an amazing list of credentials. I just want to tell you a little about him. He has an advanced teaching certificate and a doctorate in metaphysics. And he's taught for over 20 years different self-development techniques. He is also an ordained minister, and he has a certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell University. He was mentored by the famous Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. And today, that's what we're going to talk about, is this heart healing system that David has created. And it's an amazing lifestyle program, so I can't wait to talk about that. Welcome, David.
Hi, David.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kathryn and Patrick. Good to be here.
So this is a perfect time to be talking about health, since the whole world seems to be in a panic about a little virus. And we know the basis of everything is a healthy immune system. So why don't we just start from the beginning, David, and tell us a little bit, how did you come to get into the plant nutrition field to begin with?
Very good question. Appreciate that. Many years ago, about I think it was the summer of 2007, I started experiencing very significant chest pain. And I knew that it was my heart. My dad had died at a very young age from heart disease. He was only 45 when he passed away. And I was having these experiences, and eventually I got to a hospital and was diagnosed with severe coronary artery disease. And they did these tests, where they go up into the heart to determine the severity of the blockages in your arteries. And I ended up with a stent that was put in and told to return to the hospital to have 2 additional stents in another month or 2. And I remember at the time when I was in that hospital, I was not liking the idea of ever returning back for that kind of procedure. Besides, I saw what had happened to others who had coronary artery disease, and it's considered a progressive disease. And most of the doctors at that time, and even today, don't see it as a healable condition. It is one that can be controlled, and through medication, additional interventions, and surgeries, open heart bypass surgeries. So usually people consider that will be kind of a death knell, if you will. And even if you live many, many years, it will certainly have a tendency of shortening one's life. So I was lying there thinking about my situation, and I thought there just simply had to be an alternative that at the time I was not aware of. And I became very committed at the time to determine what that alternative would be. So in a process of various things, I end up in a health food store talking to the owner of the store, and I asked him his opinion on what maybe I could be doing. And besides all of the supplements that I really didn't want to have to get too involved with, he wrote down the name Esselstyn on a slip of paper. And I took that slip of paper back to my hotel where I happened to be at the time and Googled the name Esselstyn, and discovered a gentleman by the name of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. Turns out he had been head of surgery at Cleveland Clinic for several decades, and he had opened a part of the hospital called integrative medicine. And there his intention was to take a group of people that had severe coronary artery disease, and his determination, or his thought, his vision, was that if they would only eat foods that were determined to be beneficial to the endothelium, which is the inner lining of the arteries, and to completely eliminate all the foods that were known to be a detriment to the endothelium, once again, the inner lining of the arteries. And they would do that consistently for a period of time. He wanted to see what would happen. And he took a group of people that had the severity of disease, and there were about 24 in the initial study, and all but one, I believe, stayed completely compliant with what was going on, and he had an amazing result. These people, they called them the walking dead because they'd been sent home from the hospital with no further interventions that could be accomplished by any cardiologist. So they were sent home to get comfortable if they could and wait for the inevitable at that point. Well, that didn't happen. They're still alive several decades later, many with a proven reversal of their disease. At the very least, a stopping of the progression of the disease. And that got my attention. I ended up in Cleveland to visit with Dr. Esselstyn. He taught me various things, and I got on board with a very strong compliance with his system. And little by little, my numbers, all the numbers that had been high for so long, like my cholesterol level, my blood pressure, I had developed diabetes. I had other conditions. I was obese. I was very heavy, at least. I think it actually was obesity. And I followed his system and his guidance, and little by little, I was doing amazing. Lost 60 pounds and just felt amazing. So that was my first introduction to it. The work of his, Dr. Esselstyn's work. I could go on and on with my story. I'm not ready to go too much further. If Kathryn and Patrick, you'd like to come back on board?
Well, yeah, I wanted to go back to that moment when you were in the hospital bed and you decided you wanted to go a different route. What was that? Was that, can we say it was the soul? Was it your higher self talking? Because the majority of people are just like, yeah, give me the operation, give me the pill. You chose something different. What do you think it was that urged you to find a different way when you didn't even know if there was one?
Well, you had mentioned that I have a doctorate in metaphysics. So there was an awful lot of inner visualization that was going on. There was this belief that I already had this belief for many years that the body wants to heal. Give it what it desires, and the body has a tendency of finding its way back to health. The issue is that people in general, and I was one of them, we've turned on our senses as being our main source or our main goal in life is to satisfy our senses, be it the sense of taste when it comes to food or other senses. And when it comes to food, what that has done is it's caused us to lose any sense of instinct as to what we should be doing for our sustenance, because most of our attention is, this taste good or does it not taste good? So we've lost the animalistic instinct that we had possibly as human beings hundreds of generations ago. And now most people are very concerned with what they like. And what they like is killing them. So much of what they like is killing them. And so much of what is instinctually our nutritional needs are not being met because of the taste that we have. So yeah, there was a vision involved in this that I didn't know the answer to. I had been on a farm for many years. We had gardens, we had orchards. But in addition to that, we had cows and goats and sheep and chickens and turkeys and ducks and pigs and, in fact, some emus. Well, because of that lifestyle, we also had a freezer full of pork, a freezer full of poultry, and a freezer full of beef. We had copious amounts of goat milk. that I milked goats twice a day for many years. And we had eggs galore because we had so many chickens running around. So that was my sustenance. Most people, when they're eating meat, that's kind of their primary focus, and the things out of the garden become kind of secondary, and the fruits kind of become secondary. So we thought we were doing the right thing. We were eating organically. We were eating wonderfully. And the whole time we're eating all this wonderment, I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So there was the vision and the idea that there must be something. I had dabbled as a vegetarian back in college in the early 1970s. And so I had a sense of vegetarianism. I did not have a sense of veganism. In fact, for the longest time, I really didn't even understand what that term actually meant. Now I would call myself vegan. I don't really still use that term. I'm into a whole food plant-based diet because that is the diet that Dr. Esselstyn had used to actually cause people to reverse their disease. And I had tremendous success very quickly by adopting that manner of eating. So
and
I guess,
David,
go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to bring up 2 points that I thought you brought up that were really important, is that we have lost that intuitive sense of what to eat and the dominance of the mind. And so I think that ties in with living on the farm, and you had your own animals, you were eating organic, and I myself spent a year on a farm eating tons of cheese, but right from the cows, the milk, and I felt horrible the whole year. But before I went there, my mind told me, oh, this is going to be the healthiest you've ever eaten in your life. You're going to be living on the farm. Well, I had lived in California before that, so I was used to having a way less meat in my diet. I had smoothies for breakfast. I'd have a little meat, but nothing like what I ate on the farm. And as a result, I felt the worst I had ever felt in my life. But the interesting thing was, it was the mind dominance, because like you said, in your mind, you thought, wow, this is going to be the healthiest, and totally moving away from the instinct. And I think that's part of the problem, is there's so much information out there about what to eat, what's good, what's not. We may think a food's healthy because our mind tells us that, but intuitively for our body, it might not be.
Yeah, that would be very true. And there is so much information out there. I've got a little motto that I use often, so many gurus, so little time. That's because if you go onto the internet and start typing in heart-healthy diets, you get a whole gamut of answers. And it's an amazing situation how many answers you can get. What I discovered over time was so many of those heart-healthy diets that were being recommended were, if they benefited in any way, shape, form, or fashion, they were slowing progression of disease. They were in no way stopping progression or indeed reversing. And my goal in life was to live, to end my suffering, to grow older without symptom. And most of the diets that I would look at, until I would meet up with Dr. Esselstyn and learn what he had done and understood the science behind what he had done, most of them looked like they would fall very, very short. And it's unfortunate, because the vast majority of people who are trying to eat healthier are eating foods that still do significant damage to the inner lining of their arteries. And even though they may be eating far healthier and slowing progression of various chronic disease, there's still the amount of chronic disease in our world today is unfathomable and amazingly unnecessary.
I really like one of the things that you said. You described it that vegetables, or basically any kind of plant-based foods, became secondary. And I think that's a really strong mindset in this country. People think of themselves as meat and potatoes people. And so plant food has become secondary instead of being primary, maybe supplementing with a little fish or something. But, it's probably no surprise to people that heart disease is often given as the leading cause of death in this country. But one thing that people may not really think of very often is there's one study that you cited that medical error is actually the third leading cause of death. And yet we place so much faith in, oh, well, if my arteries get clogged, I'll just, go to the doctor, I'll get on the medication, I'll get on the, have the surgery, whatever it is that that's needed. And, people don't think about all the things that could go wrong by, totally placing their faith in that approach. It's really interesting.
It's very interesting because most people don't include in their lists of the leading causes of death in the United States. Most people don't list medical error. And medical error is indeed the third leading cause from a Johns Hopkins medicine study that was done. And so they list it now as the third cause. So I like to think that since most of my work is centered around heart and vascular disease, and trying in whatever manner I can to influence people to catch the vision of actually taking control of the disease that otherwise is being managed by medical care, is how to move from eventually. I cannot by law simply say, I think you should give up this and should quit doing this, but I would advise to consider the alternative of whole food plant-based nutrition, very specific foods and highest density of foods, because then you have control of two of the top three causes of death in the United States, being heart disease, number one, and the third being a medical error. So if you're not involved in the medical system, you're not subject to medical error. And if you're actually doing everything you possibly can to actually end progression and reverse your heart disease, you're also ending basically your cause of death as being heart disease. So go ahead.
So what would you say to some of these guys that are out there and say, okay, well, yeah, it makes sense. Everybody told me eat more vegetables growing up. And so, I've been diagnosed with this coronary disease. So, I'll just add maybe some of that broccoli with all the butter drizzled on it to go along with my potato with more butter and sour cream and chives and my big steak, and so if I just increase my vegetables a little bit, I'll be going in the right direction. What would you say to that?
Enjoy your food. Please, every bite that you take, enjoy it, give it your full attention, chew it thoroughly and enjoy it. But if you're actually thinking that I'm about healing. I'm not about pretending or thinking that you're doing the right thing when you're not. If you want to prevent heart disease, and certainly if you have heart disease and you are a patient with heart disease, you cannot afford any sense of compromise or moderation. One way of looking at it is you have a house fire that's going on inside your arteries. The inflammation's amazing. Damage is being done by molecules moment by moment, day by day, year by year. And what happens for most of these diets are you end up with a compromised diet that moderates some of the horrors that you might have been inflicting on yourself prior to doing better things for yourself. But they're guaranteed to continue the progression of your disease. My encouragement is to consider that your goal is not to slow progression of disease. Your goal is to heal. Your goal is to return to a natural state of health. And compromise will not do that. Most people have heart disease, whether they're diagnosed or non-diagnosed. It's been found that even babies have some fatty streaks in their arteries from the mother's diet. But what happens is it's kind of like a house plumbing. It takes a lot of time of pouring grease down the drain to finally take a a 2-inch drain line coming from your sink down to your sewer system or wherever it's going, to finally be so narrow that it starts backing up into the house. That's kind of what happens with your arteries. And eating broccoli is wonderful. Eating broccoli with butter defeats a lot of the purpose of eating the broccoli in the first place. So I would also suggest learn to find other, since we are so sense-oriented, find other flavors to flavor that broccoli with. You don't have to have something that's going to be doing damage while you're trying to do a healing mechanism.
So it sounds like this isn't just a half measure kind of approach that you're talking about. This is something that you really need to be committed to, which makes sense. I mean, if you've gotten to the point where the symptoms are so dramatic that they started to manifest where they're apparent, you've gone to the doctor, you've gotten the diagnosis, there's severe blockage occurring. It sounds like, it would make sense that there needs to be some significant changes made to really be able to not just slow the progression, but to reverse it. So what about somebody who would say, oh my gosh, this just sounds too extreme. This is such an extreme change in my diet. I just don't think I can handle this. What would you say to people that think that this is too extreme?
Great question. I'd have to begin my answer by looking a little further at my story, because I know I sound like a very, very intelligent person sitting here on the other end of the radio. However, there was some idiotic activity that I involved myself in through the years. It's been about 13 years since I started learning about, and I studied it intently, the science, to where I understood what was going on in the body when certain molecules would go in. And I had so much success, and I was so compliant for several years, that what happens is you almost begin to believe that you're healed from the disease. And I recommend people assume that they're not at that point, because that is actually the time to buckle down, because what ends up happening is you think that you can begin to moderate your diet to some degree. And my personal experience led me to this. You asked a question, what do you tell people that believe that this sounds very extreme? I got to a point where I was told by the cardiologist to go to a larger hospital in the bigger city near us, lie down on a table, have my chest cracked open, have them cut into my leg and take a vein out of my leg and sew it onto the arteries of my heart and staple me or sew me back together, and I would hopefully awaken and not die, and I would end up suffering and hope not to die. Or my option was, from what I had learned, was to eat a healing diet, continue to become compliant again, reverse the disease that I had allowed to develop further, avoid any other additional chronic diseases, which we can have in a different conversation, and live a long and purposeful life helping other people learn how to avoid unnecessary disease experiences. And I would ask the listener, which of those two options is extreme?
I love that, David, because I think that all the time when I have friends with different diseases and I'm like, hey, you could just use some herbs, change your diet. And they're like, oh God, I couldn't do that. And then they turn around and go to the doctor and do something drastic, like shove chemotherapy down their veins or whatever. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you would rather do that than just like take some herbs and change your diet. It's really mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, and there's another level to it that you might consider. We kind of live a delusional world, if you will. There's so many influences that we follow the herd in those influences. And metaphysically speaking, it's really about the individual awakening to their true nature. And these diseases are not a part of our true nature. They're the result of attachments to the illusion, not the actual reality behind the illusion. And therefore, there's more to just diet. There is beginning to awaken one's consciousness to the natural being, the natural state of being, who we are as spirits, who we are as light, we are as energy, how we work with that energy, how we work in that light. Food is this kind of ultimate manifestation of that. And the truest manifestation of that deals with whole grains, beans, vegetables, and fruits.
All right. Well, David, we're going to have to put a pin in that and take this up on the other side of the break. We are getting ready to go into a short break, but first we'd like to welcome a few of our new affiliates. Radiotomy and B-Tuner, MyTuner, and Streama are additional places you can now hear Spirit's Journey. So I'd like to welcome them to our family. And you are listening to Spirit's Journey on Truth Frequency Radio and One Talk Radio. We will see you on the other side.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
No hate, no hype, no fear. Real people, real radio.
We are back from the break. Just joining us, this is Spirit's Journey with Patrick Kathryn Andries, coming to you live from Truth Frequency Radio, being simulcast on Talk Radio. Today we have David Matthews, visionary heart patient. Welcome back, David.
Well, it's good to be back.
So, David, I want to pick up. You were talking about an interesting phenomenon that occurs when we get into this fear mode. The medical system is so overpowering and so strong that I think what happens with a lot of people is they get into this, they buy into the fear, like, oh my God, if you don't do this procedure today, you're going to die. And so that shuts out their own inner voice. And I think a lot of the people that get healed from anything, whether it's heart disease, cancer, you name it, have been able to override the medical voice telling them what to do and become self-responsible and listen to their own voice and follow their own path. So because obviously you did that, what would you say about that? And how can people remove themselves from that medical fear mode?
Education and knowledge obviously will be helpful. For instance, there is so much on the internet that deals with what it is that I teach, my heart healing system. I'm not alone in what I teach. I believe that if you actually understood that there is a subculture of healing that's happening that you don't hear about as often because it's more glamorous, the interventions that medicine can do, and there's always the next pharmaceutical on the television commercials, and we're inundated with that. We're not inundated with, hey, wake up today and eat your oats with blueberries, and for lunch have kale and brown rice and whatever. You're not that, and everywhere you go down the road for food is meat based. You certainly don't have super broccoli, on every street corner in America. So that's one thing. To become knowledgeable. I have a website that you could go to and learn a great deal, and it leads you to many, many, many other sites.
What's your website?
Well, it's the I've got basically Heart's Flow Healing is the name of it. The Visionary Heart Patient. You can go to either one. I'd go to visionaryheartpatient.com. and you'll learn a great deal. You'll learn a great deal. The other thing besides the education to help you deals with really you awakening to your own inner being. And I don't mean you have to go, to supreme enlightenment with this yet, eventually, of course. But when you awaken to your own self and you recognize that what you're thinking, what you're doing, how you're being affects everything about your life, including your health, you begin to realize that this was not forced on you. This was the result of choice. And the stronger you develop your will, and everyone can do this. Most people choose not to exercise it, but all people are human, and they have the ability to strengthen their will and make their choices more positive. But once you start making that choice and moving in that direction, it builds on itself. You keep wanting to do more. You keep wanting to know more about who you are, why you're here, why are you sick, how did I do this to myself, how can I do things differently so I don't continue to do it to myself. And once you become educated and you realize that you've been creating your own heart disease, or for most part cancers and COPD and stroke and diabetes, and the list goes on, when you begin to realize that you're not a victim of some outside force, then you can realize that if you created it, you can resolve it.
So, David, I know you studied nutrition through a program at Cornell University, and I would love to know, because I've learned some things from you that after my years of nutrition study surprised me. So I'd love for you to share, what are some of the most surprising revelations that you learned that completely blew you away?
Well, what comes to mind, since I'm not prepared for your questions, what comes to mind immediately is we were all raised to believe that our protein would have to come from animal sources. And so in the process of that, our whole society, world society now, except for very isolated cultures, are more and more meat oriented, because then they're getting what was presented as the highest quality protein. And I'd say one thing that blew me away the more I learned it was that actually all vegetables contain protein. All plants contain protein. And you get plenty of protein eating vegetation. One way of looking at that is one of the strongest men on the earth is pure vegan. Look at another way. Every ox out there and every gorilla out there, they're not carnivores. They're eating the plants, the grass, whatever they are naturally drawn to eat. And look how strong they are. So that was a major eye opener for me. Was protein is not what people have been taught. You get plenty from eating vegan. There's just too many examples of it in nature and in human beings. Some of the strongest athletes on the planet. I don't mean just strong men. I'm talking about bicyclists and swimmers and football players, et cetera, et cetera. They swear that their endurance, their strength improves drastically when they gave up animal foods.
Yeah, I would agree. That totally shocked me to learn that the strongest man in the world is vegan. And yeah, I think it's a brainwashing that we all received. I don't know if it was because the cattle industry took over and, all brainwashed us, the food pyramid. Oh, get your protein from meat. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon to look at, how we've all been brainwashed by that, and we have to unbrainwash ourselves, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because I'd recently learned some new things, and also learned quite a bit talking with you over the last few years with some of these changes that you're making. But the idea was ingrained in my head that for vegetarians, the only way to get all the amino acids that you need to form a complete protein is to combine beans and rice. And, just some of those things, just thinking, oh, well, all the plants have some form of protein. But then also another thing that people are complaining about a lot, which that helps take care of going with a more plant-based diet, is just how all of the meat products that are available now through commercial operations, like the corporate operations, are pumped full of antibiotics now. And a lot of these things that we don't want in our system. So, there's so many things going on with all of this commercial farming and ranching and everything that, this really helps take care of a lot of that.
Can I read something to you?
Sure.
One of my favorite books that I found years ago was written in around 1900. It might have been 1910, but that doesn't really matter. So the language is kind of an older style of language, but it was a book on vegetarianism from that time, and I absolutely loved it. And just today, as I was cleaning up my office, I found just a lone sheet of paper I must have printed out. And as I read it, I thought maybe there would be an opportunity during this radio show to read this little short section.
Sure.
A knowledge of what is the right food to eat and of the right way to eat it does not, under existing conditions of life, come instinctively. Under other conditions, it might do so, but under those in which we live, it certainly does not. And this is owing to the fact that for many hundred generations back, there has been a pandering to sense. Thus, I was talking about this earlier. There has been a pandering to sense and a quelling and consequent atrophy of the discriminating animal instinct. As our intelligence has developed, we have applied it to the service of the senses and at the expense of our primitive intuition of right and wrong that guided us in the selection of that which was suitable to our preservation and health. We excel the animals in the possession of reason, but the animals excel us in the exercise of instinct.
Wow. That's
so
powerful.
True. So true. Yeah, you think of the animals. No other animal on the earth drinks milk from another creature, but we do. I mean,
well, not after they're raised and weaned. They do. Mammals do the first.
No, not from a different species.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. They drink milk from their own species, but you don't see a dog trying to go get milk from a cow. It just doesn't happen. Their instinct is so strong. So I love that, David.
Yeah, it was.
Well, also just a little thing I can add in here regarding milk, talking about drinking milk, is, people think, oh yeah, there's a certain segment of our population that's lactose intolerant. But in reality, what we have found through study is that those are the people who actually have the normal genes, because the human body was not intended to drink milk past the age of 4. And so the enzyme that would help break down the lactose in the milk goes away at around the age of 4. But it was actually a mutation that occurred because there were usually northern people who had a shorter growing season. So they probably resorted to drinking milk when all of the plants were no longer sustaining them. And that's probably actually how we started eating meat also, is in those northern areas where we couldn't get plants during the winter. And so people would resort to hunting. But then as it became more common, apparently, people just started doing that year round, which I don't think initially was ever a year round kind of thing. It was just something to get them through the winter. They'd go out and hunt game during the winter to kind of get by until the spring when they could, pick berries and eat fruits and plant their gardens and everything again. So, yeah, so it's just a mutation actually that we're able to do that. And, a lot of people may not know that I have a background in physics and biology. So one of the things that I thought was fascinating when I was studying biology is that our digestive tract is actually so long that they say it's really more conducive to herbivores. And so even though we have a stomach with acid, we have mutated to be able to handle meat, but our digestive tract, our intestines are still very long, like 36 feet. And so that's more typical of a herbivore, because carnivores out in nature have a very short digestive tract, so the meat doesn't get stuck in there too long and then putrefy and then make the body toxic. So, even if people are going to add meat, one thing they really need to be aware of, even if they're healthy, is eat plenty of vegetables and roughage and stuff to keep pushing that out quickly, because otherwise the meat putrefies and that actually adds toxins in your system.
Agreed. And obviously meat has zero fiber. The only place you ever get fiber is through plants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point too.
And a lot of people that do the keto diet, we have somebody that does it, and he says that's the biggest problem. He has to take loads of, powdered roughage to be able to, go to the bathroom normally. So it really can mess up your system in a lot of ways. So David, do you want to shoot us any true false questions? See if you can get us on a couple questions about veganism that we may not know, and our audience can participate at home.
Yeah, we can do a few. I didn't bring up true false when you asked me. I brought up some multiple choice. How about we do that?
That's good.
Fine.
All right. Well, let's just start with number one. I've got 100 multiple choice questionnaire that I give people, but we won't do 100. We'll do just a few right now.
I don't think we're going to get through all those.
Yes. Which of the following is a heart-healthy oil? Coconut oil, olive oil, vegetable oil, none of the above.
Well, it's interesting because I've always heard coconut oil has a lot of healthy benefits, but I'm thinking from what I've learned at this point that I'm going to go with none of the above.
Yeah, ditto, D.
None of the above. Well, why not? Why not? I thought olive oil was a heart-healthy oil.
Well, all the oils clog the arteries, especially when you heat them. Then they become full of more free radicals. So that's what I know about them, even though the coconut oil may have some healthy benefits.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm going with that is because I saw a documentary recently, and I'd love to know which blood tests they did, but it was actually fascinating. They showed the blood work from these athletes, and they had one group that had eaten animal products and one group that didn't. And they showed the blood work, and you could actually visibly see the difference between those who had animal products or oils in their diet and those who didn't. And so the oils actually made their plasma more cloudy. There's a visible difference between it. So that's what I'm thinking, because the oil is thicker, so it's going to make your blood thicker. It's not like the consistency of a water.
Well, and also if we're the majority water, what is it, 97% water, our bodies, we know that oil and water don't mix. So
yeah,
70%.
Oh, 70% water. Okay.
Well, Kathryn might have been drinking more water than you, Patrick.
What's that?
Kathryn might have been drinking a little bit more water than you.
Yeah.
Maybe if she's a jellyfish.
Yeah, there's a test called the brachial artery test. And what it basically shows is what happens to your arteries when you consume fat. And obviously, oil is incredibly concentrated fat. It's one thing to eat an olive. It's another to take a concentrated oil and dump it into your arteries. And what ends up occurring immediately is a constriction of the opening of the artery. And it remains that way for quite a period of time until it has a chance to relax and open back up. And unfortunately, by that time, the person that is experiencing the constriction in the artery has eaten another high-fat meal with oil and meats and such things, and so it closes back down. So bottom line is the arteries become harder and narrower. There's just less blood flow, and it does lead to the atherosclerosis, or the hardening of the arteries. Let me ask you another one.
Sure.
If you were wanting to avoid having a stroke, which of the following choices would be your best choice? White meat baked chicken with the skin removed, skim milk, spinach, or all of the above?
Spinach.
I'm going to go with spinach also.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm all about, so of course it's going to be spinach. Skim milk, you talked about milk a moment ago. Studies have been done that show you can turn cancer cells on with the casein in milk, and you can turn cancer cells off by removing it and not allowing it. So dairy products, cheese, yogurt, milk, these have all been shown to be some of the greatest cancer-producing products or foods that we do consume.
And that would be seen in the China study for folks that I know that's what they came up with as a result, that I can't remember what percentage of protein you eat, that once you get to that level, you kick on the cancer cells. So,
the China study was Colin Campbell, and yes, he had done tremendous research on all of that. And I too don't recall off the top of my head what percentage it was, but it was specifically all animal proteins act differently in the body than plant-based proteins, but specifically the milk proteins, the dairy proteins that were turning off and on the cancer cells. I don't recall the study exactly being on cancer with the meat proteins in that manner.
Yeah, from what I remember off the top of my head, and I do want to give a disclaimer because it's been a while since I looked at it, but from what I recall, it was based on using animal products. So I don't think it was any specific products, but it was just whether they included animal products in their diet or not, which would include milk and meat and stuff like that. But I think it was when you drop below about 20%, then the growth of the tumor would stop growing. And then when you drop below 5%, it would actually start to shrink. And so actually, Kathryn's saying here that it was actually studying casein specifically.
Well, folks can reference the China study because we're not quite sure on it, but let's shoot to the next multiple choice.
But one thing I did want to mention real quick about the casein, I noticed in some of the non-dairy cheese products that it says it's non-dairy or a non-dairy alternative, but then when you read the ingredients, casein is actually one of the ingredients because it's probably something they need in there to get the texture. But if casein is actually the problem, that's not really helping you. So be sure to read the ingredients.
Absolutely. And I'll make a comment on that as well that is very, very important for people to consider. The newer terminology for the vegan is the whole food plant-based nutrition, simply meaning that you do as little to the food as is needed for your recipe or whatever, and certainly avoid as many processed foods as you possibly can. Some might be considered, as a Dr. Michael Grieger suggests, yellow light foods. There may be some processed foods that are yellow light. Most are red light, meaning you avoid them completely. And so these cheeses you're referring to, they're very, very processed to get to the point that they're at. And I would recommend for any heart patient, any visionary heart patient, to completely avoid as many processed foods as is possible. So let me ask you one more question here. It's number 3. I'm just going through. If you are overweight and want to attain a healthy weight in the healthiest manner, which of the following diets is your best choice? A, Mediterranean diet. B, ketogenic diet. C, plant-based diet. D, paleo diet.
Well, I know that you are big into plant-based nutrition, and so I would say the plant-based diet.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple question. Of course, you know the answer from my perspective and from the science of the perspective of science. I don't want to mention much, but for instance, a ketogenic diet is according to one doctor that I recently read, if I remember it right, he called it a physiological parlor trick. It tricks the body into losing weight, but the ultimate long-term damage is going to be enormous for those that stick with it very long. So the Mediterranean diet by another doctor is described as a diet guaranteed to cause heart disease. Even though it may seem to be a healthier choice, it's still not getting to the root causes. So any more questions, or shall we talk about something else?
Let's have you talk, David. I love how the phrase, the visionary heart patient. So why don't we close? We've got about 2-3 minutes here. Tell us what it is to be a visionary heart patient. How do we do it? What do you offer?
Okay. The visionary heart patient really came to me because of the inner work you asked earlier about. How did you come to this choice? And there was a lot of inner work where I envisioned that, yes, of course, nature provides the answer to my situation. So that took a level of vision, and I use that word because I want others to become the visionary heart patient as well. And look at themselves as their own doctor, utilizing appropriate foods, and I promote the meditation and stress reduction techniques and concentration techniques and breathing exercises, which all go together as part of the entire system, as well as some exercise. And so I'm encouraging vision. I'm encouraging individuals to capture that they are the locus of control of the disease. They take that control, they take that responsibility, they caused it in the first place, and therefore it's up to them to fix their problems. Does that kind of give you an idea of the visionary heart patient aspect? I will give a little bit more on what is it that I do. I have a mission. And my mission statement goes simply to help heart and other vascular patients by promoting healing, eliminate symptoms, and achieve quantifiable improvements. I also say this: if you decide you want to embrace the safe and proven alternative to reverse your condition, remember what I'm referring to is the only diet that has been proven to reverse coronary artery disease. It's very important that you understand that. This is the only diet proven. But if you decide you wanted to look into it, your mission then, in your imagery, your vision will be to return your vascular system to optimal functioning, thereby eliminating the cause of heart and other vascular disorders in the first place. So I love the image of, I started something earlier talking about the fire that's going on in our arteries. We've damaged our endothelium so badly that the whole goal is to re-optimize the way that the blood flows throughout our entire body. We all understand the purpose of blood flow, carrying nutrition and oxygen and removing toxins from the body. Well, you have to have a optimally functioning system to actually have optimal health.
All right. Well, that's all we're going to be able to do for today, David. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you back on, and we love having you all with us. So please connect with us on our Facebook page at Spirits Journey Radio. Be sure to like our page so that you can be part of our life. Also, you can listen to any replays on demand on our YouTube station at Spirits Journey Radio. So this has been Spirits Journey on Truth Frequency Radio and Oneness Talk Radio. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Visit David at heartflowhealing.com.